Hi, I'm Kelly and we're in somebody's garden today and we're going to look at apple tree pruning, and I have several different types of pruners you might want to use. These are loppers, these are ratcheting loppers. So these are for bigger limbs. If you don't have a lot of strength, you can put it on your limb and then it ratchets it. They're kind of a pain. If you do have enough strength, they take forever, but they do cut well. And then for smaller limbs, I have these just regular little clippers. And then this is my absolute favorite that I haven't taken very good care of, but this is a pruning saw. And these come in all different sizes. That you can cut any size limb with them, and they cut on the pull. So I'm going to show you a few different ways to prune. If you want to go look, it's got a 45-degree angle, which is what you really want with a fruit tree. It fruits best at 45 degrees. Sometimes you see people that prune their apple trees to go down, and that is not the ideal fruiting. So I do summer pruning, so then you don't get water sprouts. Those are weak, they grow really straight up, and they don't produce any fruit. So these trees have already been pruned for the summer. They're definitely planted too close together. If I had it to do over again, I would plant them further apart. But I'm pretty happy with the shape of this tree. Over time, I would like to maybe open it up a little more so it gets some more sunlight into the branches. But you don't want to cut a lot of your tree off in 1 year. Probably no more than 30%, but 10's ideal. And here is a pretty good example of one that wasn't pruned properly when it was young. And so I think I got a good deal on it and left it in a pot for a number of years. And I just neglected it and finally got it planted. Well, I didn't prune it enough, and I came home one day and the tree had completely fallen out of the ground because it had so much fruit on it. Because sometimes if you leave the limbs really long, the heavy fruit will pull it over. And so I've been trying to rehabilitate it, kind of. I actually managed to pull it back up, and it's lived several years since its accident. And it's still got a crooked trunk. It's really hard. It's better to start with the tree and prune it correctly than try to prune one that's been pruned badly and start over. So this is a pie cherry tree. And the thing about cherries is they really do not like being pruned. And so when I bought this cherry tree, it was supposed to be a dwarf to get about 10 feet tall. Well, it's now about 20 feet tall, and I like cherries, so I really don't want to cut it down, and it's doing well. But I'm never going to be able to make this tree the size that I want it to be. If I went and started cutting it, it's just going to make it sickly and not very healthy. And right now, it's a really healthy tree, so I just live with having a tree that's twice as big as any of my other trees. So this is a hydrangea. This is a plant that people often misprune. And I know this video is primarily about fruit trees, but I'll give you a couple tips on some other varieties of plants. So this is a hydrangea that is about the size it's going to be. So I just enjoy it here. You can kind of prune it back a little bit. Like if it was coming into your walkway, you could prune it a little bit. But most people want to make them shorter than they are, and you can't do that with hydrangeas. You have to buy a dwarf variety. Because if you prune them down, for one thing, they're probably not going to have as many flowers, and they're also going to be weaker and floppier, and eventually it takes like a year or two and they're back to the exact same size they were before you cut them. So this is another plant that people often prune incorrectly. This is a rhododendron, and when I first moved here, it was planted next to my driveway, and obviously it wants to be really big. And so I moved it. Rhododendrons are super easy to move. They have really small root balls. It's really close to the surface. Better to move them in the winter, but I have successfully moved them in the summer. You just have to water them a lot. So the main thing with rhododendrons is you cannot keep them smaller. They're going to be the size they want to be. So if you have a rhododendron that you don't like it, you definitely just need to move it. One thing you can do with rhodies that they look really good, and I'll probably do this eventually with this one, is prune them up so they're more like a tree. And then you can plant stuff around them and they look nice that way. But if you cut a rhododendron back, you could kill it, or it just comes back and by the time it looks nice again, it's big. So flowering plants, the one key is you can prune them right after they flower, and with the rhododendrons you can kind of cut off some of the new growth. Like this one, I'm cutting off a flower, that's next year's flower already. But if I would have done this right after it flowered, then I could kind of keep the size down some, but they make rhododendrons in all sizes, so just get the one that fits your spot. The flowering currant, it's a common native plant. It's just getting really too big for this spot, and this is one you definitely can prune. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through and we're going to prune off some of the branches selectively all the way at the ground. It'll help give it some more light, and then we're going to reduce the size a little bit. And take off. And the same thing, you don't want to cut out a ton at once. So the other thing too is just go and look for branches that look like they're crossing, stuff that goes straight up. Just kind of give it a nice form. So this plant hasn't been pruned in probably ever. So I am just going to cut a little bit off, and then I just need to keep up on it in a few years. So that's probably all the branches I'm going to thin out, because if you overdo it, you weaken the plant, and it's just not going to be as healthy as you would like it to be. So you're better off to wait and just have patience and do it over several years. When you want to cut back, you want to cut back to just above a bud. So I'm just going to shorten a few of these. I'm definitely getting to my 30% here, so I'm probably not going to cut off a whole lot more. These are really pretty shrubs, but definitely more of a background plant. You get mainly, most of the interest is in the spring. Hummingbirds really like them. So I'll come in next year and prune it off a little more. The one thing you don't want to do is people prune their plants like a meatball. What that does is it causes lots of twiggy growth, and then pretty soon your plant's all twigs. It doesn't have that area where it can get the airflow in. And you can see where it has flowered. That's the fruit. It's kind of stinky. So here's a bud that's going up, and I just want to cut it right above it like that. So then this plant will grow, and then that is no longer there. So one thing you don't want to do is like, oh, I just want to cut it. So look how far you are away from that bud. So you definitely want to cut back to a bud, because this will probably just die, and then you'll have a dead ugly twig. This is an old apple tree. It was here when we moved here. It was completely neglected. It's probably 30 or 40 years old, and I really haven't done much with it because this was an animal pen, and I really didn't care if the tree was here. But it's getting weedy underneath, so I wanted to be able to mow underneath it. And so I decided, well, I better do some renovation. So the biggest mistake people do when renovating old apple trees is they go and they cut every branch off. Well, it took 30 years for this tree to get super overgrown, so it's going to take a few years to get it back to health. So this tree hasn't been pruned probably the best, but I'll show you some examples of probably good and bad. So one thing you can do, which I have not done with this tree, is if it's dead, it doesn't count towards your 30%. So you can go ahead and cut off. And this tree has a lot of dead in it, and I'd be here forever cutting all the dead. So I haven't done it. I will probably do some more in future years. And then if I did everything to this tree that it needed done, it wouldn't have any branches left, because you want to thin it out. You want to make them go kind of 45 degrees up. You want to get rid of all these crossing branches. So pretty much this is a years-long project. It's pruning with a chainsaw, which is not ideal. But what you want to do is do an undercut and then cut it so that you don't rip back. And you can see a few spots where I did rip back. So this one's kind of a rough cut, but you do have the bark color here. So that's good. This should heal good. This cut here, see it tore the bark some. It didn't get a real smooth cut, but it does have some buds coming out of it. It should heal up. And then here, over here is some cuts that were done badly. So this is definitely too close to the trunk. I would want a little more of the bark color so it can heal a little better. And there's some other ones here that are definitely too flush. So the other thing about this cut is it's too big. Like normally you would not want to take off a branch this big. It definitely weakens your tree, but this branch came out like this and went straight down. So it definitely wasn't something I really wanted here. But it is really hard to renovate old orchards. That's the main thing people do, is there'd be no limbs left on this thing. They would probably cut it back to like this main 3 trunks and call it good. Well, then you're going to create a lot of straight up water sprouts. It's going to be a couple years before you get fruit, and your tree is forever weakened after you have done that. So there's definitely some things here that in the future I will cut off. Like there's this branch completely goes in the center of the tree. It's crossing. There's lots of branches that go into the center. This is probably a 10-year renovation on this tree to really get it in good health. I just want to cut off a lot of these inner branches, get some new branches going out that way, and just kind of increase the health of the tree. So at some point this tree is kind of tipped over also. So it's never probably going to be the perfect tree, but it produces good apples. So as long as it stays around, we'll enjoy them. So this is a crab apple, and I have not really pruned it before, but this is really similar pruning to an apple tree. So I thought it'd be a good demonstration on how to prune an apple tree. So first thing you want to do is this has a sucker really low, and I want to get rid of that. And I'm using these pruners, the ratcheting ones, which is probably a mistake because it's got this wire around it to protect it from rabbits. So we're going to get rid of that. And then I want to be able to mow around this, so I'm going to take a couple of these limbs. And you want to get, so right here is the bark color, so I want to get just above that, because that has that healing properties. And if you cut it a little too high, you can go through and recut it. This type of pruning saw cuts on the pull. So you pull, and then you lift, and then you pull, and then you lift. So I can cut off a branch pretty easy with this saw. This one's dull, but especially if you're going to prune a larger branch. And this one's dull because it doesn't make quite a clean cut. But these are great. I love pruning saws for any sort of a larger limb you might want to cut off. They work really well. I don't want to cut too many branches off at the same time on this tree. So just kind of look at it. You might want to step back and be like, whoa, this tree has all the branches on this side. So I want to cut probably more off of this side. The thing about crabapple trees is they tend to seem to get really long, scraggly branches, more so than apples. And we get a lot of snow where I live, so they tend to break. So this one I'm actually going to cut just a little bit at the top. You don't really want to top trees because there's something called apical dominance. It's in the top, it's a hormone in the top bud, and it keeps the tree dormant. So as soon as you cut that off, that hormone's gone and your tree will be stimulated to grow. Since we're summer pruning, that's not as much of an issue. And we're pruning back to a bud, so it's going to allow that bud to grow. This is an older crabapple tree. It's been here, I don't know, about 7 or 8 years. That one's probably 4 years old. It's nice and full. It's really healthy. So I don't prune a lot off this each year. So I'm kind of happy with the way that this is. I'll probably take some of the branches and cut them back so they're not quite drooping down so low. But for the most part, this is a pretty good prune tree. I'm just doing some little pruning here just to kind of show you just above a bud. And that will usually go the direction the bud's pointing, so that'll have a tendency to go up. And you're just lightening the weight on the end of the branches. See how it kind of popped up? Just so I can mow my lawn. Okay, so this is a maple tree. It was here when we moved here. It's giant. And one thing about maple trees is they tend to get weak crotches, and you definitely don't want to have that happen. And you can do it in apple trees too. So definitely make sure when you're pruning you want an open branch area. They call it the crotch of the tree. If you have this, then the water and the dirt and everything gets down in that crack, and then it doesn't dry. So your tree can actually be really weak there. And this tree here has that. I think it's just because it's not because anybody pruned it poorly. It's because the snow broke it when it was young, so then it got multiple tops. And this is the same thing that happens when you top trees. They tend to get these weak crotches, and that's much more vulnerable. Like this tree will probably split one day. So this is a quince tree, and I haven't really pruned much on it because I think I just planted it last year. But this tree has really bad form. If you look, it's got the weak crotch, it's got two weak crotches, and it's got this branch really low. So the first thing I'm going to do is cut off this branch really low because it's actually coming from below the graft, and you definitely don't want that. That'll take over your tree. So this tree here, I mean, it's fairly little, so I'm not going to cut off a lot, but it basically has two tops. So these two tops are going to fight for dominance on the tree. This one's kind of winning, but I want to take this back. I'll probably put a spreader in here to open up this branch a little bit and kind of let it so it doesn't have that weak form for when the tree gets older. But for now, I'm just going to cut it back. This is an inward facing bud, so that's not ideal. But now that should stimulate it to put some buds out this direction. And then, you know, we can just form the tree over time. People tend to over prune. You're better off to kind of go on the lesser pruning side because you can cause more damage over time.